Today's episode is sponsored by Datadog, a cloud-scale monitoring platform that unifies metrics, traces, logs, and more in a single pane of glass. Automatically alert on performance anomalies, easily build custom dashboards, and collaborate to resolve issues in real time. Try Datadog for yourself with a free 14-day trial. Hansel Minutes listeners will also receive a free t-shirt. Visit bit.ly.com/DatadogShirt. That's bitly.com/DatadogShirt to get started. Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes, and today I'm talking with Michelle Sun. She is the author of First Time Coders, a definitive guide to coding for children. She's been a guest instructor at MIT and has done their master trainer program. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me, Scott.
Yeah, I always love talking to people who are excited as I am to teach kids how to code. And when I was reading First Time Coders, that folks can go ahead and check out in the show notes, and you can buy it, at bookstores and online everywhere. You call out a number of things, like there's the fact that everyone wants their kids to code, but you also talk about we have digital devices in every kid's hands. We worry about screen time, and you're thinking maybe we can turn that around, and screen time isn't such a bad thing.
Definitely, yeah. When we look at the kids these days, that their childhood is really surrounded by digital devices, be it the iPad or tablet or smartphones, and a lot of times they interact with it when they see their parents using it or their sibling using it, and they turn them into gaming devices. It's very easy for them to download or play with games that are already loaded on the phone, or use it to watch videos on YouTube or other video platforms. And it became an entertainment place for them to go to. Whereas for children, they are full of creativity and they always want to tinker with things and draw things or build things using very hands-on experience. And the good news is that the past few years, there are so many tools out there that is turning coding into such an accessible thing for even a child as young as 4 years old can start to learn how to code. And so by introducing them simple coding concepts, we are essentially giving them back that creative power onto when they interact with the digital devices.
Interesting. So you call out a couple of interesting examples in the book. You mentioned like Bill Gates, many years ago when his kids were younger, had very strict limits. Steve Jobs' kids didn't let them have an iPad when it came out. But you're saying that rather than turning them into kind of mindless consumers, we turn them into creators by being more flexible about screen time, but we allow them rather to create and code using those devices.
Yeah, definitely. And the main thing that I think is important when handling screen time with young children is really to differentiate their time spent in front of the screen into creative and passive uses. So passive uses is like, okay, like looking at the screen and playing in yet another round of games for the 10th or 20th time, or watching videos that are just, funny or kind of like entertainment uses, whereas creative use could be, coding is one of them, and the other one could be, simply editing videos or editing photos, something, or even creating a illustration on the iPad. So all these things are like the creative use is very beneficial for a young child's development, whereas the passive use is purely entertainment use. So by teaching them this differentiation, I believe is more empowering than strictly saying, oh, well, no screen time. And then, once they grew up to a certain age and the floodgates open and they suddenly can use the computer, then they wouldn't know what to do with it, and they would need to learn that eventually as well.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Well, I don't think we don't technically or often think of like making music with GarageBand or playing with iMovie as being coding. It is structured, systematic thinking. Again, it isn't necessarily coding, but if you start making really complicated videos or content, you're doing quite a bit of work to do that, and that is using the brain, probably the same part of the brain as one would use if you were actually writing code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that active engagement, we know that is a reasonable thing, but it's worth pointing out, and you call this out in the book, that a lot of parents, they feel guilty because they're using it as a babysitter. There's a lot of anxiety about it, and we're all making this up as we go along, right? Like we knew it was good to let our kids watch Sesame Street, but I don't know what they're doing on the iPad, and I don't want to be lazy. I don't want to catch myself into letting the kids be on that for hours just because I need a break.
Mm-hmm. And it's really, I see that as like every generation, there's like a new tool that's out there where I think when the television first came out, like there was all these paranoia about like, okay, whether this is something we should bring into the house. And so technology is really like a tool that we can use it for our benefit or our detriment. And so it's really about knowing what we want to get out of it. And there's, sometimes there's nothing wrong with enjoying a video, to relax. And I think teaching our children to be mindfully consuming or mindfully spending time with technology is very crucial.
Mm-hmm. You also call out, and I think it's really cool that you bring this up, is that kids move through different developmental stages. And if you try to teach a 4-year-old Python, that 4-year-old's probably going to just hate computers and think like, oh, computers suck. And then you're going to turn them off on the entire topic, right? So you do point that out.
Yeah. And coding is a challenging subject for a lot of parents to approach for their children because, not a lot of parents know how to code, and if you didn't learn it, even if some of us learned it in university, like the language is so different, in this generation, and probably evolved a lot as well. So it is different from subjects like math or English or subjects that we learned, and probably like the math and English haven't been updated. Like the rules in the languages and math hasn't been updated for decades. So for coding, sometimes we see parents come to us and say, well, Python is used by all these big companies like Facebook and Google, and so I want my child to start learning Python as soon as possible. And I think the essential thing to remember here is that coding is like there's so many different languages, and the languages are always evolving, and there's always new languages being developed and released. And so for a 4-year-old that started learning coding today, when they graduated from university and going into the workforce, they're probably using very different languages already for computer programming languages. So the lesson of the story here is that instead of fixating into one particular language, choosing an age-appropriate language is really important because it teaches the foundation, the fundamentals of what programming means, and the concepts that are the computer science concepts that are pretty much very universal across different languages. So what we see is that for children that have a good foundation of their first language, they go on and pick up the second and the third language much faster, and also they can grasp the new languages much more solidly.
Interesting. I feel like, and I've talked about this before, and I'm curious what you think, that there is a direct parallel between learning a computer language and learning a language to speak. And you just gave the example where a parent, maybe even a non-technical parent, might say, well, Python's popular, we should learn Python. Just like I'm sure thousands of American parents are saying, well, Chinese is useful or Spanish is useful, our kids should learn that, therefore they will be more marketable, I guess. They'll be able to get a job. But the same thing applies in programming, that there's always going to be new languages. And, it was Japanese in the 80s and it's Chinese today and it's Spanish tomorrow. Maybe we need to teach them how to learn languages, how to decompose problems.
Yeah.
Like you talk about computational thinking, that's more important than just memorizing syntax.
Definitely. Yeah. I think coding is one of the greatest way to counter the rote learning and the simply memorizing type of learning process that is quite common in the previous generation of learning. And I think schools and educators are now starting to think about ways to teach children in more problem-solving ways, and to break down problems and apply their creative thinking to generate solutions. And coding falls right into this category where, if anyone who has learned certain amount of coding before knows that there's very little amount of memorization that is needed, because the syntax or the even the library documentation is all online. And sometimes we tell the students that a big part of knowing how to code is also knowing what to search on Google. So knowing where to find the knowledge and knowing how to bridge the gap in the coding knowledge is really key. And together with that is that when it comes to coding, what we're really hoping for students to learn is really how to think like a computer scientist. So computational thinking, which is really like a fancy word for problem solving. And so there's 4 key elements in computational thinking. First is decomposition, so breaking down the problem. And the second one is pattern recognition. So looking at how similar or whether there's any patterns in the problem, and then abstracting. So abstraction is the third step, which is to start thinking about, okay, how do I formulate a solution that could be applied to more different similar problems in the future, and then generate an algorithm to solve the problem. So this computational thinking process is applicable regardless of what computation programming language someone is using. And actually more broadly, it can be applied to even non-programmers, right? Like, so if someone is designing an organization in a fast-growing company, they might need to look at using computational thinking to break down, like decomposing the problem that is in front of them, and then cycle through the 4 steps and eventually come up with a solution. So we see that coding, certainly there's a lot of interest in the technology space now, and a lot of parents now aspire for their children to become the next maybe Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs, and to be the tech entrepreneur becoming a very common aspiration for young children nowadays. But at the same time, I think coding is really much more than that. It's like a way to teach students how to think and how to solve problems. So even if their career in the future doesn't lead to, maybe they never code anymore, the thinking process they learn from being a coder, from building things using software and writing programs, it's still a helpful thinking process that they learn and they can apply to various jobs.
Yeah, one of the examples that I try to explain to my kids is that when, they can get around with Uber or Lyft today, but I still want them to know how to change the oil and change a tire. But the fact is, I haven't personally changed a tire in 15 years. But the skill was fundamental to understanding how cars move, and everyone should change a tire once, even if you ride the bus the rest of your life.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great example. And I think that also is about, having that curiosity and have like understanding how things work um, around us. And technology is such an intertwined aspect of our lives now, right? Is where we cannot shut it down. And I think eventually, there's I think there's no best time to say, okay, this is a time, age where it's good to start looking at screens or start introducing coding. At the same time, I think coding is a helpful tool to help children in this generation to see the world in a more informed way, to understand, oh, I've built, a um, maps, a travel app for my friends in this coding class. And then when they download an app that is related to that, and they kind of see it in a more creator's mindset, and rather than just a user at the other end. So I think that part is also very powerful.
Yeah. Hey, friends, let's thank our new sponsor. Have you heard of the Uno platform yet? Uno platform is the open source platform for building native mobile, Windows, and web assembly apps. It's tested on over 200 real-life projects. You can build performant, single code-based, cross-platform line of business apps today. Now, I realize it sounds unbelievable, so I'll say it again. Single code base, native mobile, desktop, or web apps, and you're using only XAML and C#. Nothing else is needed. There's Visual Studio support, a vibrant community using C# and XAML. It gives you skill and tooling reuse. Check it out at platform.uno. That's platform.uno. I also think that the point that you make about willingness to learn, like jumping into programming, can be very intimidating. And if we can get kids early to believe that they can do something, that sense of power is important. Otherwise, we will end up self-selecting and ending up with just a certain kind of personality in programming. You don't want to teach a 4-year-old that math is hard and get that tape in the back of their head, like, oh, math is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Math isn't for me. We certainly don't want people to be thinking computers aren't for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's such a big, it's almost like that's like everything that's around our lives. And, our smartphone is just a small computer on our hands. And I think that really brings back the importance of choosing tools that are age appropriate, and stick with it for perhaps a little bit longer than an like a kid or even the parent think is feels like it. And so one example would be for Scratch, which is a tool that we introduce for the 6 to 8 years old. We recommend that for students that age group. And we usually see students that go through the entire academic year, once a week type of thing, and to go through the same tool like Scratch all over. And it's very easy to say, oh, well, they've done one semester of Scratch, like what about, Python next? Like there's always Python. The thing about jumping from one language to the other is that we always say that you rather go deep in one language and really understand. Like it's so powerful. Like each language, you can create so many different projects. There's so much fun that not just kids but even adults can have fun on these platforms. So in so many different ways. So sometimes one of the key things that we see that prevents a student from learning fully the language is to move on too quickly and to feel the urge to almost like collect a collection of language that they know, and each of them maybe know a little bit but not too much. So we see much more positive results when a student learn one language really well and create maybe 30 different projects, and then they are very capable and very confident about picking up the second language.
Yeah, one of the things that I really appreciated about your book is that you call out that no one language is superior to another. A lot of books like this could make a big declaration and they would say, you must learn Python. That's the language that your kids need. And you call out, pick a language. Here's 5 or 6. Here's what they're good for. But when you do pick one, stick with it, right? Don't bounce the kids around to different languages. Just pick one, get good at it, and then learn as many as you can, as many as make you happy.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah, these things are really important. And I appreciate it also that, and maybe you planned this. Did you write your book in such a way that you weren't writing it for parents that are programmers? This seems like a book that I could recommend to someone who is a parent but isn't a programmer. This is for regular people.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, one of the things that I've noticed when it comes to teaching kids to code is that it's so challenging for parents who haven't had that exposure before and didn't know how to code. And it's almost that they're also curious themselves and they believe that it's an important thing for their children to learn. At the same time, it's not like math or English or any other subject or even like science that they've kind of learned in school, even though maybe they don't use at work anymore. Like they kind of remember certain things here and there. With coding, it's really like almost a black hole where they're like, well, I have no idea what coding is. So one of the goals for this book is to really demystify coding learning for young children to the parents that don't necessarily know what coding is. And hopefully, the way that the book is written, it makes coding as a subject much more approachable for parents, and some of the projects for the different age groups, we hope that the parents, even for those who don't know how to code, can read through it and can follow it and work on it next to their kids, maybe just for a family evening or weekend activity. And we've done similar workshops for like in-person workshops for parent and their child as well, and it's very engaging. It's actually a very fun bonding experience, because I think sometimes computers or digital devices are more of a separating energy in the household, where let's say after dinner, let's say mom and dad might be, both on their phones on the couch or something, and then the kid is playing on the iPad, and so everyone is like in their own worlds. And so that's one case. And the other case sometimes would be when sometimes that happens for children that are slightly older, when they start to use the computer to do homework, or they have the one laptop policy per kid at school, and they kind of start to have this tension in the home that's like, for example, dad might say, oh, why are you on the computer again? Like, are you playing games? That is, you have screen time limits, right? And so sometimes we see that technology in the household become such a tension, or at least like making family members not as communicative. And so hopefully for this book, like it can serve as an activity idea for families to use technology as well together, and parents can learn something new, and of course, like hopefully the child also can pick up something as well through some of the exercises in the book.
Right, but you're explicitly calling out the idea that we can choose to let this thing be a thing that we control and that rips us apart and it keeps us separate, or we can be intentional about how we use technology, try to make our kids creators, not consumers, or at least not passive consumers, and in doing so, bring the family together rather than taking it apart.
Yeah, and it's such a fun thing to do that, I think for students that have been learning for a little longer and they start to learn, building apps or building websites and really starting to build things with JavaScript or Python, and they can start to really build solutions for the family, right? So one of the examples I quoted in the book is one of our students, Sarah, who has she has four siblings, so a big family, and one of her end of year project was to build a family calendar app for her mom, or well, for her family, because her mom has been using a giant sheet of paper that is stuck on the wall of the kitchen to keep track of every single person's schedule. And every week she would draw up something like a new piece of paper and manually write down on the wall. And so her app, it became something that really is very personal, right? Like probably she can put it on the App Store and for other, seven people family to download, but it's really intended for her own family, and I think that is usually one of the best starting point for students that are starting to be able to create websites or apps, which is to solve a problem that is so close to them. It is their personal problem, something that can help their family, their friends, themselves, and making that really make technology much more of a daily thing it is very empowering for students to see that, wow, I can create something that makes my life better, my family's life better, in even like a very small way, and it's fun to do that.
Exactly. And I appreciate that, because I think what you're saying is that we need to have the kids not only be intentional, but be problem solvers, right? You are more powerful when you can look at your world and say, look, mom has a problem, or mom can say, I've got a problem. Maybe the kids can solve that. They can write an app or something. And in part 2 of your book, you actually specifically call out different age groups. And I like the way you made a taxonomy around this. When they're 4 or 5, they play. When they're 6 to 8, they tinker. Tweens, 9, 10, 11 love their games. But then 12 and up, you can really start thinking about apps. You can start solving real problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that really brings back the idea of seeing the world in a different light, where I think there's one way to experience the world would be like, okay, well, all these infrastructures built for us, like, for example, you mentioned like Uber and Lyft, like, okay, well, great, like, so convenient for us to get around the city. And that is something that and knowing how to code and having the experience of building things really bring into a different perspective of, wow, somebody built this, and that's amazing. And also, what are the complexity that goes behind that, and having that curiosity to ask these questions.
Right. And when you say you see an application and you say somebody built this, I think the next question that I want my kid to say is, well, why wasn't it me? Like, why not me?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's that sense of power that we want folks to have. So First-Time Coders, folks can go and find it. They can look in the show notes. I'll make sure we have links to Goodreads and all over the place. It's from Lioncrest Publishing. But you also have an organization that teaches kids in person. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So First Code Academy, and I started the company 6 years ago, and back in 2013. And yeah, so that is really the inspiration behind the book, where through interacting with probably tens of thousands of parents over the years, I just see so many of these questions come up from very keen parents that want to bring their kids to learn this important topic of coding and technology, and hopefully this book can address some of these questions and make it fun for both the children and the parents in the process of learning to code.
Mm-hmm. And First Code Academy is right now in Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, Macau. Are you moving that to the West as well?
Yeah, so we're starting to offer online classes as well. And so, yeah, stay tuned for that.
Very cool. Well, thanks so much, Michelle Sun, for chatting with me today about your book, First-Time Coders.
Thank you so much, Scott.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.